101 albums that changed popular music. This is quite the list. Many of the entries you'll understand. Some of them you might go by, and some of them you're probably going to wonder why they're not on the list. Chris Smith, also known as Chris Cannon, is the author of the book, and he joins us now. Thanks for coming in this morning.
Thank you for having me.
We've been having lots of fun this morning playing some of the songs from some of these albums that you chose. But, you know, some of them I think like I was saying to you during the break, I didn't even know some of the bands, like Captain Beefheart, but I'm probably not. It's not my era, but I still don't know who he is. And some of them I totally agree with, even if I don't like them. Like I do, I'm not a Spice Girls fan, but I agree with it.
It's my least favorite album in the book. I'm not a big Spice Girls fan either.
And I mean, the thing is that you say in the book, you don't like all of these albums.
Right.
Yeah. So what was the criteria?
Well, they weren't aesthetic choices. I have been part of the that Rolling Stone 100 albums, 500 greatest albums machine when I was a music critic in New York, and I also have a background as an anthropologist. And so what I wanted to do was marry the two concepts and not just look at the albums aesthetically and see what was good, what was bad. I wanted to expand that to show what larger cultural impact these albums fed into the cultural medium, what they drew from and what they contributed, which is why I wrote the albums in chronological order, so that you could see how one album played off another, how it played off the general culture, how it influenced the general culture. The
very first one on the list, and you said, I'm not sure if it was in your book that you said this or if I read it somewhere else, the Anthology of American Folk Music in 1952. You've said that you think that might be actually the most important one on the list.
Yeah, I think it's probably the most important recording of the 20th century. It was a collection of past classics, a 6-album collection that was brought together and into a 6-album collection and influenced a lot of acts that came after that. It brought a lot of hidden folk music to the forefront, influenced the Beatles, Bob Dylan, Grateful Dead. Bob Dylan covered a lot of these exact same songs, but probably wouldn't even have heard of them if it wasn't for this Harry Smith collection of 6 albums.
It's funny that you mentioned something in the book, and I can't remember exactly which section, but there was some, well, I thought it was an obscure album. I can't remember exactly which one, but I thought it was somewhat obscure. And but the way you explained it, it was like if there hadn't been this album, then so-and-so wouldn't have been inspired to write this album, which wouldn't have inspired this album, and it almost like the world would have ended if we hadn't.
Yeah, I think you're thinking of the Weavers at Carnegie Hall. It was a 1955 concert at Carnegie Hall, and this was very close to the McCarthy era, where a lot of folkies were blacklisted, including Pete Seeger. Then in 1955, they came back. The Weavers came back and played a sold-out concert at Carnegie Hall, and it came right after McCarthy was discredited. And then in 1957, they released an album live at Carnegie Hall, the Weavers live at Carnegie Hall, and that went on to spark part of the folk boom of the late 50s. So if you didn't have that, then Woody Guthrie probably wouldn't have been as influential around the turn of the 60s. And if you didn't have that, Bob Dylan probably wouldn't have made his pilgrimage to New York to meet Woody Guthrie.
Right.
He wouldn't have fallen into the folk scene. He would have remained a rocker, which is what he was in high school.
Right.
And then you wouldn't have the influence on the Beatles, you wouldn't have Sgt. Pepper's, and the face of rock music would have been completely different. Even though a lot of people haven't heard of the album, the 1957 Weavers at Carnegie Hall, in that respect, how it's related to the cultural medium, it fed into a lot of albums that came after and changed the landscape of
Sounds
rock
almost
music.
like an episode of Lost, but the musical version. Okay, let me just list some of these. So, of course, Elvis Presley, Miles Davis, Birth of the Cool, Bob Dylan. You've got, I think, 2 or 3 Bob Dylans on here. Jimi Hendrix. I mean, like I said, some of these are really, like, I would call them gimmies. Like, they should be on the list. And then some of them I like, but I was surprised that they were on the list. Who was one that surprised me? Suzanne Vega surprised me. And you also chose, like, sort of in that vein, Suzanne Vega, Annie DeFranco, and I think there was another one that... I love Liz Phair, though. That's my favorite album ever. That Exile in Guyville. Favorite
album. She's a terrific artist.
But Suzanne Vega, for instance, what was your rationale for that?
Well, Suzanne Vega was one of that ilk of late 80s female singer-songwriters that launched this boom of female singer-songwriters in the 90s. She was one of the originals, and I don't remember if this is exact. I think she was the first one that had a small folk album in the 80s that went on to large sales and influenced a lot of the DIY artists at the time, with the advent of artists like Ani DeFranco, who went out and sold tapes out of her trunk and built this word of mouth following. This generation of artists kind of redefined what it meant to be an independent artist at a time where technology was growing that was allowing them to do that. And now, of course, we have someone can record an album in their living room and put it on the internet and become a rock star without ever leaving their living room. And that was kind of the beginning of the path of that, because these artists would work really hard to travel city to city, sell 10 tapes out of their trunk. You know, they'll drive 800 miles to play for 10 fans, but you have that grassroots movement of that supported DIY artists.
It's a really fascinating book, and we could talk for hours about it. And I still haven't read the whole thing, and I want to read the whole thing. If you would like to pick it up, it's called 101 Albums That Changed Popular Music. It's written by Chris Smith, but he also writes under the name Chris Cannon, so you can find him online at cannonwriter.com. And it's available just in major bookstores?
Yeah.
Okay.
Everywhere.
Probably best to go on his website as well, cannonwriter.com. Thank you so much for coming in.